Hello, welcome to the Totally Well Show. I'm your host, Joyce Strong. The Totally Well Show is a place where we get curious, ask questions, and explore everything to do with health, wellness, fitness, personal development, helping people, and all the things it takes to help you live a strong, joyous life. My guest today is David Burkus. David is a sought-after speaker, a best-selling author. His latest book is A Friend of a Friend, which is how I met him. He's actually from Groton, and I met him through my daughter, and they went to high school together. So we get into talking about his favorite subject, which has to do with how to connect and network with people and how our brains work as humans, how we think and what makes us want to connect. And we talk about 3 degrees of influence. And I immediately was able to apply that into my coaching practice. So I'm so excited to reintroduce you to David, because you probably know him already if you're from Groton, because he is too. And enjoy the show. Hello, David Burkus. Finally, I get to meet you and talk with you. Thank you so much for coming on my show.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. And yeah, it's great. It's great to chat live. I'm used to just trading comments in LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever, right? So it's kind of fun to be synchronous for once.
Yeah. So just so our viewers know, from the Totally Well Show, know how I met you. Years ago, my daughter put you on my radar because she's been following you for a long time. And she said, I went to high school with this guy. So I live in Groton, Mass. And my daughter, Casey, went to Groton Dunstable Regional High School, which is now the middle school. So a long time ago, 2001, I guess she graduated. Did you graduate the same year?
Yeah, same year.
Yeah.
Back when I haven't been since it moved and it's now the middle school. So that always feels weird to me, because now they talk about the high school and I'm like, I've never seen that building. I don't know what that building's like.
A whole new building. And I think you're both June birthdays, so you're born the same year, the same 83s, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So anyway, she kept telling me buy his book, and we bought one of your books. I've since bought your Friend of a Friend, because she bought a book before that. What was the name of the?
Probably Under New Management, probably the red one.
Yeah. So we bought that, and then since then we've been following you. And so she said, don't bother him. And one day I reached out and I was like, but this is what you're about. You'll get it. You're a friend of a friend, right?
Yeah.
And
well, yeah, sorry to disappoint Casey, but I'm glad you reached out. It's to me, it's actually kind of funny, because she and I interact on Instagram and you and I interact mostly on LinkedIn. So it's funny the way, I don't know if that's a generational thing or what it is.
Yeah.
But it helps break the conversation up nicely too.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much you'd chat with her, but she was like so worried I was going to bother you, because you're so, you're doing all these great things now. And so thank you for letting me be part of your circle and being so responsive with me.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So now that you're not in Groton, you're in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
You're married, you have a couple kids.
Yeah, so I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My wife is originally from here. Her family's from the other coast, right? But they moved here and she grew up here.
Yeah.
I moved here to go to college, met her. She said a couple things. She wanted to get married and she wanted to go to med school.
Yeah.
I did a quick calculation and figured that the medical school debt on in-state tuition in Oklahoma would be better than dragging her back to New England and having her try and study somewhere. So I was like, yeah, let's stick around here. And then, so that was through medical school and through residency. And then really by the time she got out of all of that and we were free again to go anywhere in the country, I had pretty much, the first book was already contracted and it was about to come out. I had started traveling to speak at a lot of different events and work with companies. And I realized that, like, in that world, no one was charging a cost of living differential on a speaker fee or a consulting fee. And so I started to realize, hey, wait a minute, like there's a whole lot of benefits to staying in a low cost of living area. So we've been there pretty much ever since. And I've become a big fan of what I call the sort of B-list cities, the outside of the major cities, right?
Yeah.
And I knew this, like, I think about this now in the context of I was right next door to one. Boston is great, but cities like Providence or even Nashua and Worcester and other places like that have most of what you want, but at a dramatically lower cost of living that makes it a whole lot easier to do the whole family thing and all of that. So that's what we're kind of in the throes of. So we're here for the foreseeable future for that reason. But I will tell you, we're recording this in like the second week of October, and this is the time I miss Groton the most. Because I see pictures from friends of what the leaves look like, and I think about the chill that's in the air and the old wood-burning stoves from some of the older houses. They're starting to put that smoke in. And here, I mean, it was 92 degrees until last week, and tomorrow it'll be 36. It's just fall is like a 4-day long season here. So I definitely, this is the time of year that I miss not being there.
Yeah, I can understand that, because it's just at that, although it's kind of dreary today, but it's, the pumpkins, the apples.
Oh, and like apple cider. A lot of folks, I mean, I love a lot of things about living in the South, but there's this misconception here that you should be able to see through your apple cider. But no, a good glass of apple cider, you should not be able to hold it up and see through it, right? But,
right. Absolutely, yeah. And we warm it up. So, and how old are your boys?
They are, right now, they are 7 and 5.
Oh, wow. That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, great ages. So some of the things I wanted to ask you about, I listen to your TED Talks, and I follow your Daily Burks. Is that what you call them?
Yes. Yeah. It's not a very creative name, but
But I really enjoy them because you're funny, and they're just bite-sized enough to really get something, and it's just refreshing for me.
Oh, well, thank you.
But some of the lessons you teach really tie into my theme and my show totally well, because you tap into sometimes into health issues. Like yesterday, you were talking about take a nap. You kept saying it was so funny, take a nap, and then I responded back with Z's. But and I was just kind of curious what your thoughts are on health and in what you do, if you see the connection like I do.
Yeah, well, so the unifying theme throughout all my work is when I'm thinking crudely, I joke that I'm trying to make work not suck. When I'm trying to be polite, I say that I'm trying to help people do their best work ever. And what I mean by that is that we need to pay attention to the science of how the human body works, including the brain, right? How humans interact with each other, which was a lot of what Friend of a Friend was about, et cetera. All of that plays into whether or not you're most productive, right? So when it comes to, like, yesterday's episode was about taking a nap. And I had read a study about basically people who take naps 2 to 3 times a week are 25% less likely to have heart attacks, strokes, or other cardiovascular events. And one of the things that hit me that the article I was reading didn't even talk about was, like, if that happens to you late in your career is usually over at that point, right? Yeah. So we often talk about how to get more productivity week by week or day by day, but we don't think about productivity in terms of how many years do you want to work? I mean, hopefully you only have to work for as many as you want. But I think what the bigger problem in America is that a lot of people are not able to work and thought they would have more years to do it. And so they end up having a pretty rough last third of their life because some unforeseen circumstance like that. So then you see this article that says, like, yeah, just take a nap and you'll decrease your chances of that happening. It was fascinating to me, even the parallels between that and productivity that my mind leapt to. So that was the reason we ended up doing that episode. So yeah, I mean, I'm overdue. It's 1:45 as we're recording this. Once we get done with this, I guess I need to go take a nap myself.
Well, I think sleep is incredibly important, and as I do my research and reading, I'm realizing that we don't, on average, sleep enough, and so it's like a badge of honor to work 20 hours straight. But it's
I hope that we get to this place where people start bragging about how much sleep they get. This is something I've never understood about American culture, that a well-rested mind is a massive competitive advantage in the workplace, right? And that means, that the most recent research I've seen said that the average is between 7 and 9, and that's where we get 8 hours of sleep. The irony of it, if you think about average in a bell curve, it's like 7 to 9 is one or two standard deviations out from that average of 8. Which means that if you're one of those people that thinks, like, oh, my body, I can survive on just 6 hours. Like, really? Are you part of that 2.4% on either wing of a normal distribution? You're probably not, right? So you're probably lying to yourself, and then you don't realize you're lying to yourself because you're so sleep deprived. You keep the that lie going. So yeah, the ability to kind of carve that time out. It's not, I mean, we think of it as just a health issue, but a well-rested mind is a massive competitive advantage.
Yeah, I love hearing it said that way, because sometimes it can be that thing, that value system a person has that drives them. You know, sometimes if I want to be on a weight loss curve, I can be competitive with somebody else. And it seems awful, but that might be just the edge I need to work a little bit harder at it. So,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you wanna
Well,
be
and the amazing thing to me is that people also brag about how many hours they work. They don't necessarily brag about how productive those hours were,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean, I've had days where I worked 9 hours too, and all I did was clean out my email inbox. That's not something to brag about, right?
yeah,
I'm much more proud of, like, if I'm in writing mode working on a book, I'm much more proud of a day where, like, wow, I knocked out an entire like chapter
yeah,
today
yeah.
in the same amount of time I'm going to devote about the same amount of hours to writing on any given day. So brag about how productive you are in those hours, not how many hours you got.
Many hours. Yeah, yeah. Well, I love that. Now, you talk a lot about networking and how the brain works and how we connect with people, and that's what drew me to you first. That really understanding that, because from my perspective, I think it's one of the big gaps in health, like the root cause behind, somebody might come to me as a coach or nurse and say, I have autoimmune condition, or I have, I'm overweight, or whatever the thing is that they want coaching on. It's usually around health, because I'm a nurse and that's where I focus with my coaching. But behind it, it's often they're in a prison in their life. They're not connected or following through with something that's important to them, or that they've always wanted to be. So the ability to connect in a meaningful way is just so underlying everything about your health and wellness. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this trend, especially right now, and it kind of disappoints me. There's this trend towards any change you want to make in your life, you can make by just changing your habits. And so we focus on, habits is a great answer to what we used to focus on, which is just sheer willpower of avoiding too many carbs or too much sugar or what have you in a weight case, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we were like, well, but let's look at the habits that are triggering that behavior. So I get that idea. What I look at from a wealth of different research and how humans are social creatures, we're tribal creatures, and studying how networks influence everybody, is that I actually think it's probably easier to change the people you're around than it is to change your habits, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to change your life when you have the same friends, and it's not as hard as you think to change your friends. And so that's one of the angles. We talk about it right at the very end of Friend of a Friend, that you are being influenced by not just, there's an old Jim Rohn quote about the 5 people you interact with most, but it's not just the 5. That entire community that you're around is influencing you in certain ways, in ways you may not even be aware of. And so taking inventory of that is the beginning of a lot of different changes.
Well, I think I mentioned when we were chatting offline about how I've changed my lectures to include the three levels of influence, I think you called it.
Yeah, the 3 degrees of influence.
3 degrees of
And
influence.
the term was from Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler. They were the researchers that kind of discovered it. It's this fascinating insight that it actually starts from not far from where you are. It started when they were looking at some of the data of the Framingham Heart Study, which was, again, it's just a health study. It's a study where we discovered the relationship between cholesterol and heart disease and that sort of thing.
Right.
And what they realized is that there were all sorts of social questions in these inventories that had never been analyzed. And they used those social questions to build out a network of the whole of Framingham, Massachusetts that was a part of this study.
Mm-hmm.
And they found that they could predict, the first one they did was obesity. They found that they could predict obesity levels based on who you were connected to. That if your friends were obese, you were more likely to be obese yourself. And it wasn't correlational. It wasn't just like a selection bias, meaning that skinny people hang out with skinny people or what have you. It was causal. The study ran for 30 years and counting, so they could look over time at the changes. The most interesting thing to me is that then they found that 1 degree out, if a friend of yours is obese, right? If a friend of yours is obese, that's one level of influence. But even your friend of a friend still has an influence on your chances of becoming obese. And your friend of a friend of a friend, even if you don't know them, still has some level of influence on you. And then they found it in similar things like smoking, in depression rates or absence of depression rates. They found it in a bunch of different areas. So they coined this term 3 degrees of influence. That's not to say that someone 3 degrees out has the same impact as your best friend. But I think it's telling that they still have a measurable impact on you, because we're all embedded inside of one network, and the specific section of that network that we're a part of has its own set of norms and behaviors and acceptable versus unacceptable practices. And that affects us more than we give a lot of credit to.
Right, right. Well, that's what I really try to dig in with my clients, and what I'm learning, what I've learned from you. And now I feel it, like I had sort of a more vague sense of it. And then as you have taught it to me, I've really come to want people to look at the bigger picture as far as their family, their job, their careers. Like, you know, it's like, well, it's almost like I have my friends. I can't, you know, you can't really change your family that easily. Although I have, you know, but you know, I've been through divorce, and, you know, I have certain relationships, arm's length with some people that, you know, I'm related to, but I didn't realize I could really make a whole new level of friends in different ways than I'd ever even thought about doing.
Yeah, or even just, you know, you can't change your family. A lot of times you can't change your friends. You can't uproot your whole life and go somewhere else. But you can change the amount of time you spend with certain friends, right? You can change the amount of time you spend with certain family members. You can't change who they are, but you can change who you hang out with regularly versus who you see at weddings and funerals, right? And so you can have that effect, and even that has some level of it. I think the biggest thing when people are looking to make a major life change, whether it be health related or what have you, is I think you need to go looking for communities that are already, like communities of practice that are already doing that. And hopefully you've got one. Most of us have a network that is spread out enough that you've got 1 or 2 friends that are already a part of that community, whether it be an exercise community, or even like in a health scenario, we could even use like a cooking community, so long as they're not, you know, doing deep fried everything like we do here in the South. And you've got those 2 or 3 friends who are already part of that community. So make an effort to spend a disproportionate amount of time with those people, and they will introduce you to more people who are part of that community. So over time, you're not even really feeling it like this deliberate change of friends where I uprooted my life and I moved across the country. You're just over time changing the amount of time you spend with the wrong type of people for what you want in life, and spending more with the right type of people. And you barely even notice that transformation as it happens, which is really the best way to make any transformation, is to figure out how to make it so simple that you don't notice it in the moment. You only notice it when you look back 2 years later at an old picture of you or something like that.
Yeah, that subtle thing. I've noticed in my coaching too that I've been changing how I make a recommendation. Like, somebody's going to the gym, for example, and instead of it being like, I'm going to the gym to work out, to, you know, whatever the reason they're doing that, sometimes it's, you know, just to restore, or to, you know, get strong, get more fit. But I think of it more as an opportunity to meet people who are going to be part of your tribe, and you'll incidentally exercise when you're there. But and then raising your level of awareness that this is an opportunity to connect with other people, rather than with the machines and the dumbbells.
Yeah, and you know, the most interesting thing I would say, if you look at all of this different research, is that there's not just that you're going there to meet people, but you're also going there to meet with certain people. And it works best when you are engaged in a specific activity versus like, I'm just going to go to the treadmill with other people. When you're a part of a running club, you start to see yourself as a runner, right? When you're part of even like CrossFit would probably be the perfect example of how that identity almost turns cult-like. So actually, maybe that's not a good example, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you whatever the type of physical activity you want is, there's a group of people who do that activity. And when you connect with them, not only are you making new friends, but over time, you're starting to see yourself as that identity. And we know from other research in psychology that if you see yourself as a specific identity, you're much more likely to act in ways that align with that identity. My favorite study of this was a survey of people, several thousand people. They called some of them and asked a survey, a scale of 1 to 5, how important is it to vote in the upcoming election? Versus a different group of people, they asked, how important is it to be a voter in American elections, right? So one is an identity question, voter, versus an action. And then because voting records are public records, they went back and looked and saw how many people actually did show up at that election to vote. And the ones that had internalized the idea of being a voter, the ones that had the identity piece, were dramatically more likely to actually show up and partake in it, right? So the same thing if we're thinking about exercise, right? When you see yourself as that person, that athlete, that runner, that cyclist, that kayaker, for me, it's a really esoteric sport. It's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? So I see myself as a martial artist, and as a result, show up 3 to 4 times a week for a pretty grueling workout because that's what we do. That identity, the combination of that community and then the identity that community brings with it is a powerful combination.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's like reverse engineering. You know, you have to, I say that a lot to people, you have to be that person, but it's hard to have somebody own it if they're, you know, they're coming in and they're very overweight, or they've got other issues, work issues, say they're in a miserable job they hate and they want to start their own business in a completely different space. They can't even, it's like the Grand Canyon to them, and so to be there, it's really hard.
Yeah, and you know, we should emphasize we're not talking about like that sort of fake it till you make it type of thing. Lie to yourself and call yourself a runner when really like you've just started a couch to 5K program.
Yeah.
What I mean is that if you can find that community and be a part of it, that community will keep you going. And mentally, you'll probably think, oh, it's so nice that this community is letting me be a part of them, right?
Yeah.
And you make those connections keep you showing up. And then somewhere, weeks in, you'll suddenly flip and you'll see yourself as a member of that community, right? So it's exactly what you need to do. You need to make that identity flip. The beautiful thing about communities and about some of the research calls them shared activities. The beautiful thing about these things is that identity piece comes accidentally. The people are the reason you keep showing up every time.
Yeah. I'm thinking about doing it as a parent, like you know, as a dad, me as a mom. The first time, Casey was my first, right? And that moment when I held her the first time and I was like, look at mommy. And I said, I identified myself as mommy, and it was a switch.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Right. It's a new identity that carries with it all sorts of behaviors and responsibilities and that sort of thing. And it definitely changed you. I mean, the same thing, like I've found, at least, and I only have boys, so I can only speak for that. But I've found that I actually get more traction with behavior saying like things like Burkus's don't do that, right? When I'm trying to negate a negative behavior, like this is what we do, right?
I do the same thing.
You've got this identity and you're sort of a part of it, and that this is part of it. That tends to work better. I mean, there's actually in this identity piece, just like the be a voter thing with adults, there was actually a similar study done in children. It was the importance of helping in a classroom versus being a helper. Everybody wanted much more likely to actually engage in behaviors, helping clean up the classroom and that sort of stuff when we encourage kids to be a helper versus just to help, right? Identity precedes action and reinforces action. So it's much more powerful to focus on that than just to focus on the action and reminding yourself to do the action.
You're giving me great ideas for helping people. I think I might have incidentally done it for somebody yesterday. I was taking one of the TV shows that I did and putting it into my podcast, and the person I was doing it for, since that episode, has begun to make her own podcast but hasn't launched yet, and she's been talking about it, and I put in the show notes that she is a podcaster because she hasn't launched yet, instead of saying she's about to launch her podcast.
Right.
And it made me, I did it with some level of awareness that I was putting it that way because she was so close, and I'm like, you know, here I'm saying it's real, you know, just giving her that way.
I mean, one of my good friends is a writer named Jeff Goins, and his first, well, not his first book, but probably because he gives it away for free on his website, his most popular book is a book called You Are a Writer, right? And it literally stems from this idea that he was working as like a marketing copywriter or something like that. And he was wanting to be an author, and he was working on his first book and what have you. And then one day, one of his friends introduced him to somebody else. I think this is the story. I'm probably butchering it. And was like, you know, this is my friend Jeff. He's a writer. And Jeff was like, no, I'm not a writer. I work in marketing, whatever. It's like, Jeff, you write. therefore you're a writer, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but he had never actually internalized that identity before. And the whole book is about it basically in a writing context, adopt that mentality. You're a writer. You don't have to be published to be a writer. You just have to write. You just have to do the activity, right? And that makes you that identity. So the same thing here, right? You're a podcaster. Congratulations, right? You may not have launched yet. That doesn't mean you're not recording. So bring that identity piece in.
So yeah, I did that with my with hockey, where at all my kids. I'm just checking our time. We're almost down. All my kids played hockey, and so I did that with at almost 50 years old. I decided I was going to be a hockey player, and I had to the same thing. I had to walk in with my gear, and everybody laughed at me. I couldn't be a hockey player. I was old. I never skated before. I didn't know how to skate. But I just had to own it, and I just kept like saying it, as much as it felt a little bit imposter. I knew I watched these kids. I knew I had to be in me, so I had some level of faith at that point. I don't know why, but I know why, because I had been sick, and so I had breast cancer, and this is like, I have nothing left to lose. I might as well do whatever I can do.
I love it. But also, again, that community, in this case, it was the community of your kids being a part of this sport, that sort of drew you in. And it's a much longer time frame than like your average, I joined a running club and 6 months later I see myself as a runner, but it's still the same effect. That community of people drew you in to the point where it was your identity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we just have a couple minutes left, and I want to save a little time to see if there's anything that you can share with us about what you're up to these days, or anything you'd like to share.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to talk about at this point, right? For what we're working on for future projects and that kind of thing.
You have some secrets you can't tell.
Right, exactly. A friend of a friend left off with that idea of the 3 degrees of influence. And most of what we were talking about today is around what my thoughts have been since it published, which is the way that people around us change us. Yeah. And how you can, we use that so often in a negative, peer pressure, all of that sort of stuff. But everything we've been talking about today is how you use it as a positive. And so I think there's something there. I've got a lot more research to do, but I think there's something there to this idea that we think that it's really, really hard to change your habits or change your behaviors. And that it's darn near impossible to change your friends. But what's impossible is to change your habits in the same group of people. And what's surprisingly easy is to change the people that you're interacting with. So there's something there. I don't know what form it'll take yet, so I can't really talk about that too much, but that's what my focus has been kind of since it. And you've probably seen it because of the Daily Burk and all of those. Those are a much bigger encapsulation of like what I've literally just read in the last couple of weeks versus a book project that takes 3 or 4 years to bring to fruition. So, yeah, if you watch that in future months, you'll probably see a whole lot more of that rabbit trail.
Yeah, well, I'll be watching for sure. And I got to say, I'm absolutely in line with your thinking, because that's what I'm experiencing is it is possible to make changes, but you got to look further than like the little box you've been living in.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So it's proximal cause versus ultimate.
Yeah. There's a whole lot of things that can be said on it. I think one thing that we don't realize, again, like I said, is how much we're influenced by the people around us, and that isn't always a negative. That can be a positive. We just need to take ownership over the people we allow to be around us. Yeah.
Well, I think this is a great place to wrap up. So I thank you so much for coming on my show and giving me your time and sharing all this knowledge with me and inspiration, and you motivate me.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to, like I said, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to chat live, and I know this won't be the end of our chatting. So after the nap that I got to go take to practice what I preach, I'm sure we'll be chatting on LinkedIn or wherever. So again, thank you so much for having me on.
All right. Thank you, David.